Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Indigenous Services Canada released the findings of a forensic audit into the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations earlier this week. Today, chiefs, band members, and community members gathered in Saskatoon to respond to the millions of dollars flagged as unaccounted for. APTN video journalist Rachel May was at the conference to hear the concerns First Nations in Saskatchewan have regarding the audit.
$34,251,566. That is the total amount auditor KPMG deemed ineligible, questionable, or unsupported in funds the FSIN received from Indigenous Services Canada. The forensic audit was launched following various allegations against the organization. It focused on 9 areas: transparency, COVID-19 spending, travel, pay raises for vice chiefs, payment to a former employee, a fleet of vehicles, money paid to specific vendors, administration fees, and the FSIN's new office building. Saskatoon Tribal Chief Mark Arcand says he's been on the FSIN Treasury Board since 2013. He says the Treasury Board members' signatures are not required on all financial documents. Instead, it is the FSIN executives who sign off.
The FSIN is incorporated under FSI Inc. They're the ones that got the original draft findings on June 19th. As part of Treasury Board, we are not included. Due to the Convention Act, at the direction of our chiefs in Assembly, we are responsible for all financial matters. But we weren't invited by the chair of the Treasury Board, and that chair is Chief Bobby Cameron.
With over $34 million unaccounted for, Arcand is now asking what happens if ISC cuts funding from individual First Nations who are already underfunded.
So how are we paying that back? So when you talk about next steps, our rights holders, the chiefs, if this comes to an assembly, how can they make an ethical decision when nobody's telling them what's going on? How are we paying this money back? The FSIN does not have own source revenue. It gets money from the First Nations, 74 First Nations, $2.5 million through the First Nations Trust. That's the only way they got own source revenue.
The audit covered the period from April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2024. COVID-19 funding was the biggest area of discrepancy. Of the $26 million reviewed, $23.5 million was deemed ineligible, questionable, or unsupported. The next largest area was administration fees, with $10.9 million reviewed and $9.7 million flagged. Chief Kelly Wolf of Muskeg Lake Cree Nation says the fact that this much money went unaccounted for requires immediate attention from both the federal government and law enforcement.
How are these audits overlooked? How are these audits not red flagged? Back in our community, we have to sign amending agreements for $1 if there's any discrepancies between our funding agreement between Canada and the nation. Yet the FSIN can get away with all of this. Canada, you need to do better. And at what point do the RCMP get involved? At what point do the RCMP say, we'll take it from here?
Former second vice chief of the FSIN and former chief of Flying Dust First Nation, Bob Morasti, says the organization needs to hold its leaders accountable, something he believes cannot happen under the current executives.
These people cannot continue to have that division amongst our nations that's happening. Their continued role as executive will continue this division and disunity amongst our people, amongst our nations. That can't happen anymore. We must clean house.
The FSIN is expected to hold its General Assembly on October 29th and 30th in Yorkton. Tribal Chief Arcand is calling for the meeting to be moved to Saskatoon, where the FSIN office is located, saying it would save money, especially with over $250,000 in unaccounted travel funds. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Thanks, Rachel. Legislation that seeks to eliminate remaining inequities in the Indian Act caused by enfranchisement continues to work its way through the Senate. Bill S2 passed the first and second reading in the spring sitting of the Senate. It is sponsored by Quebec Senator Michelle Audit and aims to replace Bill C-38, which died on the order paper after Parliament was dissolved earlier this year. It is estimated as many as 3,500 people could gain status if the bill passes into legislation. Speaking to the Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples this week, Indigenous Affairs Minister Mandy Galmasti outlined some of the things the bill hopes to accomplish.
Giving First Nations the power to remove themselves from the Indian registrar and to reclaim control over their identity. It also seeks to eliminate outdated and offensive, deplorable language from the Act about dependent persons, language that really reflects a colonial attitude. It also seeks to make it easier for people, especially for women, to join the First Nations band of their birth.
To Alberta now, where the National Coalition of Chiefs just wrapped up their annual Energy and Natural Resources Summit at the Calgary Petroleum Club. Premier Danielle Smith, a regular at NCC events, was one of the speakers at this year's event. Smith has been pushing for what she calls a Northern Gateway Pipeline 2.0 that would run between Alberta and Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Swampy's group, the National Coalition of Chiefs, is composed of First Nations leaders who support oil and gas development. The NCC said in a press release on September 23rd that a Northwest Tidewater bitumen pipeline is the answer to being able to increase our production or increase our economic activity. A Mohawk entrepreneur is suing the Quebec government for millions after the provincial police seized his trucks and tobacco. As Savannah Craig reports, those involved say this signals to a much larger issue. The province is not respecting treaty rights.
There we go. We're suing for $8.1 million, which is based on the actual losses of those delivery shipments and the loss of business that they caused. So we made 287, running at like 3,500.
The president of a Ganawage-based tobacco distributor is taking Quebec to court.
Tobacco has been traded between our people for thousands of years. It's one of our 4 sacred medicines. It's very important in all of our cultural practices. So we consider it to be our product. You know your machine, Jesse.
Robbie Dixon runs Rainbow Distribution. He says Quebec is preventing nation-to-nation trade, alleging the provincial police seized his company's vans and products multiple times over the last year. He alleges that his company has racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines under the Provincial Tobacco Tax Act. He's seeking compensation from Revenue Quebec and the Procureur General of Quebec.
You go back to the British North America Act of 1867, it was declared right there that provinces have no jurisdictions at all on First Nations territories. So all these disruptions of nation-to-nation trade go right against any type of laws that or treaties they made in the past.
The seizures of vehicles, rainbow vehicles, that are referred to in the lawsuit involve trade with the Chippewas of Georgina Island, Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory, Watak Mohawk Territory, and Listigash Mi'kmaq First Nations.
Dixon's lawyer Julian Faulkner says previous court rulings allow for nation-to-nation tobacco trade, citing the rulings of the Montour decision and the Kane judgment.
Until the government is successful on reversing those rulings on appeal, the governments are bound to respect it. And we say that the opposite is happening here.
Ganawage Grand Chief Cody Daibo told APTN News the Mohawk Council of Ganawage is still assessing the issue and in talks with Dixon.
Generally, anytime community members or First Nations people get into any type of industries, there's always, this notion that it's not legal, but these are inherent rights at the end of the day, and we don't need anybody's permission.
These seizures raise concern for Ganawage's prosperity.
Will that be all?
Yeah, but then whoever finishes the quest first, we're gonna have like a $1,000 or $2,000 prize for that team. Yeah.
Rainbow employs more than 100 community members, according to Dixon.
We donate upwards of $1 million a year to community programs. We are a big supporter of the community of Kahnawake as a whole. And this is really going to interrupt not only, like I said, not only Rainbow business, but our ability to support these programs, our ability to support Kahnawake.
Dixon says much of First Nations trade is dependent on relationships with other Indigenous communities.
We have to stand up now, assert our inherent rights, our sovereignty, and take a stand before it gets worse.
I think most of the food will be served at Johnny Ray's.
Revenue Quebec and the Office for the Procurer General stated they could not comment as the case is before the courts. Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Kahnawake, Mohawk Territory.
Time for a quick break, but when we return, a nutrition program for Indigenous children feeling the effects of Jordan's principal cutbacks. Stick around. Welcome back. A rural nutrition program for Indigenous children in Yukon was recently terminated by the organization running it after it failed to secure Jordan's principal funding. But that organization that ran the program, as well as a food security advocate, say vulnerable children are now going hungry. Sarah Connors has more.
For the last 5 years, the Yukon First Nation Education Directorate's Rural Nutrition Program provided 900 children with 2 healthy meals a day. For some children, the meals were the only ones they would get daily. But the Directorate was forced to end the program after Indigenous Services Canada, or ISC, decided it no longer qualified for funding under Jordan's principle.
There's grave concern. I've had many contact me already and ask about what are they going to do? Are there other options that they have? Where can they go?
Bennett says the decision has had devastating consequences for food insecure children and their families. According to her, ISC denied the program's funding because it was meant to be temporary until families in rural communities could access existing services and supports. But Bennett argues ISC doesn't understand the reality on the ground.
Not all the communities have food bank services, so they're very limited, especially the really remote ones. And the food bank service that does come is also limited. It only comes, I believe, monthly, and it's nothing anywhere near what we were providing.
Earlier this year, the federal government transferred $7.4 million to the territorial government as part of its national school food program. Bennett says the government has approached the Directorate to run the program. But she has concerns. The program won't be ready until January at the earliest. It will only be rolled out across 4 of 13 rural schools, and the funding offered amounts to less than $2 per child per day.
It works out to, if we spread it across the territory, at $1.44 per child per day. That's a granola bar and an apple.
The Directorate isn't the only organization raising the alarm about the loss of the rural nutrition program. The Food Security Advocacy Organization says rural communities impacted by the program's shutdown are reaching out almost daily for support.
It's been really devastating to see that the impacts of these cuts on rural communities across the Yukon.
It hopes to see the territory make significant investments into school food programs, similar to what British Columbia has done.
They've not only matched, but they've exceeded the amount of funding that they're getting federally in their own investments in school food programs, recognizing that what is being provided through the federal government is not enough.
APTN News contacted ISC and the Yukon government for comment. While we didn't hear back from the Yukon government by our deadline, ISC said in a statement the federal government is committed to continuing collaboration with Indigenous partners to expand access to school food programs. The Directorate is now appealing ISC's decision. If denied, it plans to launch a judicial review in the Federal Court of Appeal. Bennett says no child should have to go hungry.
Having food and being well-fed and healthy is core to success for our Indigenous children, not just in school, just success.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
The Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton hosted Elder Jerry Saddleback for a storytelling session, and our Chris Stewart was there.
Elder Jerry Saddleback has been sharing his knowledge for decades. He is a former elder in residence, a spiritual advisor for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Samson Cree Nation member shared his knowledge at the Royal Alberta Museum about the orca and its origins and relationship with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. He talked about Mother Earth, spirituality, and the creation of the massive orca.
Them coming, deriving straight from a deity that the deity took a tiny little bit of its godly power and manifested it as a small, contribution to the whole earth.
Saddleback spoke about the importance of the orca to the Indigenous peoples on the West Coast. He described how the mother orcas share many human-like traits, raising their young.
Goes to the extremes in protecting her little ones in all of the different ways, and in fact continues that all the way through the lifetime of her offspring, and the entire lifetime. But she's also that compassionate and kindness, the embracing aspect. Let's say an example of that might be in the physical, and even in the emotional, where she feeds the children, breastfeeds for 2 years.
For over an hour, he had people at the gathering listening to his every word.
It's been wonderful. We didn't know coming here that there would be an elder speaking, so it was a treat.
It was a very nice surprise, absolutely.
Yeah. And what have we learned? We know a little bit about orcas because we frequent Haida Gwaii when we can, but we've learned like way more about the cultural component of that tonight, which was...
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
APTN's current affairs shows are set to return. We'll bring you a preview of Tuesday's Face-to-Face and a preview of tonight's French language newscast with Kim Sullivan after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Foggy fall mornings in Winnipeg. This shot of the tall building surrounding Portage in Maine, covered in cloud, was captured by Bruce Spence. Thanks for sharing. If you want to be featured on APTN National News, you can send in your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, plenty of sun, 19 in Fredericton, 21 in Halifax. 8 in Kuujjuaq and Nain, 9 for Happy Valley Goose Bay. 21 under the sun in Montreal, 13 in Chibougamau. 17 and cloudy for Sault Ste. Marie, 19 in North Bay. Sunny and 19 in Thunder Bay, sun's out and 17 in Sioux Lookout. 6 in Churchill, cloudy and 17 for God's Lake. 25 under sunny skies in Winnipeg and Brandon. 25 and sunny in Regina, 22 with the sun out for Saskatoon. 10 with showers in Uranium City, 18 and sunny in Meadow Lake. In northern Alberta, sunny and 17 for High Level, 16 in Fort McMurray. 20 in Edmonton, 21 in Lethbridge. Cloudy and 17 for Vancouver, 22 with the sun out in Penticton. 13 in Prince George, sunny and 11 in Smithers. -1 with snow in Old Crow, 7 in Whitehorse. 12 in Yellowknife, 7 in Norman Wells. 0 in Sax Harbor, +3 with showers for Pawlatuck. 4 with rain in Chesterfield, 6 and showers in Arviette. -2 in Resolute, 0 in Arctic Bay. Fort White Alive is an organization on Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg that provides outdoor and indoor programming, learning, and recreation on over 600 acres. For the entire day on September 30th, Fort White will be offering free admission for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The day begins with a sacred fire. Jason Parento is a knowledge keeper with Fort White. He says that Winnipeg is where the first sacred fire for National Day for Truth and Reconciliation was lit, and we all have to keep the fire going. Fort White's TRC committee is holding a powwow exhibition, Indigenous games, medicine walks, artists, knowledge keepers, crafts, and space for all to gather and have conversations in nature. A new bus stop has been added outside Fort White's newest building, Buffalo Crossing. Families are invited to tie an orange ribbon, smudge, sit in the gathering circle, learn, and have good conversations.
And it's for anyone who wants to come and learn more or wants a space to come and honor the day however works for them. And just having the space at Fort White is just so special because it's all outdoors.
Having the opportunity to provide good conversations and clarity for people that might not know about who we are yet, because yeah, it's 2025, but we have a huge gap to fill as far as correct history of Indigenous people. So we try and help use that lens here and provide those opportunities through different engagement sessions.
APTN's current affairs shows like Nation to Nation and APTN Investigates are set to return soon. And it all kicks off with the return of Face to Face and a special September 30th episode for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Our guest is residential school survivor Jennifer Wood, who addresses residential school denialism and a well-known denier in Winnipeg this week.
I feel sad that she's taking that stance and using that kind of energy to deny such a fact of life that actually is the truth. Why doesn't she turn that energy around of what she's doing and come and learn and sit with us and talk to survivors and go to First Nations and learn how to say hello in our language and talk to some survivors that endured abuses? Why doesn't she put her energy into that? She'd be a much better person for it.
Catch that episode Tuesday. We are joined now, like most Fridays, by the host of APTN Nouvelle Nationale, Kim Sullivan. Kim, what will our French viewers get on tonight's newscast?
Hey Dennis, we thought the big story this week was the AFNQL unions and environmental organizations coming together Monday to ask for the withdrawal of Bill 97, but yet and behold, Quebec announced yesterday that they are dropping the bill. So we chat with the regional chief of the AFNQL about this gain. Kent Monkman's famous paintings made their Canadian debut, and we give you a sneak peek. And we also chat with Melissa Malin-Dupuis about our special September 30th programming. Join us tonight, 6:30 Eastern.
Thanks, Kim. Big news indeed about that. You can catch Kim here in about 90 seconds from now, as we're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Friday. You can catch up on the week's news, though, by joining us here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.